Look, I know what you're thinking. Yes, I'm a wolf with a human name. No, my parents weren't obsessed with Earth culture. I chose it myself after spending too much time watching their sitcoms during my education years. The rest of the crew never lets me forget it either. Hey, Mike, why don't you go polish something, they'll say. Or, Mike, that's such a human way to mop the floor. But being the janitor on the Stellar Wanderer isn't so bad, especially since we got Jim Rickards as our new engineer 6 cycles ago. He's the only human on board, and probably the only being in the galaxy who can fix a quantum drive while half asleep and chugging something he calls gas station coffee. I've never seen him fully awake, actually. The captain says humans are supposed to sleep for a third of their day cycle, but Jim seems to exist in a perpetual state of semi-consciousness, mumbling about capacitors and phase alignments while shuffling through the corridors. We got along right away, Jim and I. Maybe it was the name thing. He never made fun of it like the others. Mike's a solid name, he'd say through a yawn. Reliable, gets the job done. Just like him, I suppose. Everything was business as usual until last week's supply run to Omega 9. Standard stuff: deliver some mining equipment, pick up their ore shipment, drop off their monthly food supplies. I was doing my rounds, making sure the cargo bay was clean before loading. You'd be surprised how much damage a single speck of dust can do to sensitive mining equipment. When I noticed Jim, standing in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, staring at nothing in particular. "Something wrong?" I asked, wringing out my mop. He took a long sip of coffee, his forehead wrinkled in that way humans do when they're thinking hard. "Mike," he said slowly, "does something smell funny to you?" I flicked my sensory tendrils, sampling the air. "Smells normal to me, just recycled ship air and your coffee." "Nah, not like that," he muttered, scratching his stubbled chin. "Something about this whole Omega 9 run. It doesn't smell right," he said. It's like that creepy New York business leash." I should have paid more attention to those words. Humans might be the youngest spacefaring species, but they've got these strange instincts that the rest of us lost millennia ago. Instead, I just did what any reasonable wolf would do. I kept mopping and changed the subject to last night's game of Centaurian chess, where I'd finally managed to beat him, though in retrospect he might have just fallen asleep mid-game. If I'd known what was coming, I would have dropped that mop right then and there. But hindsight, as Jim likes to say, is 20/20, whatever that means. The next 3 days were tense. Jim kept bringing up his concerns to the bridge crew, but you know how it goes with multi-species ships. Everyone's got their own way of thinking. Captain Kurth, being Arachnidian, wanted to see hard data. Our nav officer Pell just clicked her mandibles and reminded everyone that Omega 9's request followed all standard protocols. Even Dr. Zeeks, our hive mind medical officer, did that weird harmonizing thing they do when they think someone's being rational. "But the requisition list is wrong," Jim insisted during our pre-arrival briefing, barely stifling a yawn. He was on his 5th cup of coffee, which for him meant he was actually almost awake. "Look at the quantities. They're asking for way too many pressure suits and not enough food for a colony that size." "The numbers match their registered personnel count," Pell pointed out, her antennae twitching with annoyance. "Yeah, but..." Jim ran a hand through his messy hair, leaving it sticking up even more than usual. "It's not about the numbers, it's about the pattern. It's wrong." I thought it went the other way. I was mopping near the conference room door. Someone had tracked in some weird purple goo from the hydroponics bay, trying to make myself invisible like any good janitor. But I couldn't help noticing how Jim's usually sleepy demeanor had shifted. There was an alertness to him I'd never seen before, like a prey animal sensing a predator, which is exactly what he told me humans used to be, back on Earth. "Mr. Rickards," Captain Kurth's voice had that special tone she reserved for what she called organic illogic. We appreciate your intuition, but we cannot delay a priority shipment because something feels off. The colony's ore shipments are crucial for the sector's manufacturing quota. Mike, Jim turned to me suddenly, making me freeze mid-mop. Back me up here. You've cleaned every inch of this ship. Haven't you noticed anything different lately? Anything at all? All eyes turned to me, 8 from the captain, 2 from Pell, and the collective gaze of Dr. Zax's compound consciousness. I felt my cleaning tentacles curl in embarrassment. Well, I started, thinking back over the past few days. There have been more encrypted transmissions than usual. I notice because the communication array makes this high-pitched whine when it's processing heavy encryption, and I have to clean around it more carefully to avoid static buildup. Exactly. Jim slapped the table, startling everyone. Since when does a mining colony need that level of comms security, and why are they suddenly using triple redundant verification protocols for routine supply requests? The captain's front 4 eyes narrowed. That information is not in your clearance level, Engineer Rickards, or yours, Maintenance Technician Mike. She managed to make my name sound like something that needed to be cleaned up. Jim slumped back in his chair, the burst of energy seeming to drain out of him. Fine, he mumbled, taking another swig of coffee. But I'm logging a formal protest. Something stinks about this whole thing, and it ain't just Mike's new cleaning solution. Hey, I protested weakly. That's lavender scented. Looking back, I should have trusted Jim's instincts more. But it's hard, you know? When you've spent your whole life being taught that everything in the universe can be measured, quantified, and explained logically, it's difficult to put faith in something as nebulous as a human's bad feeling. We were 12 hours from Omega-9, and none of us had any idea what we were really flying into. Sometimes I wonder if things would have gone differently if we'd all just listened to the sleepy human who kept insisting that something didn't smell right. You ever notice how the worst moments of your life always start with something completely ordinary? We docked at Omega-9 right on schedule. The colony's landing bay looked exactly like it was supposed to. Everything was textbook perfect, which should have been our first clue that something was very, very wrong. Jim had been pacing the engine room for hours, alternating between muttering to himself and drinking truly alarming amounts of coffee. I was doing my usual post-docking cleanup when he suddenly grabbed my mop handle, his eyes wider than I'd ever seen them. "Mike," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "what's the humidity level in here?" I flicked my sensory tendrils. Standard 62%, just like always. Exactly. His grip tightened. A landing bay that just opened to hard vacuum should have fluctuating humidity levels. The environmental systems would be compensating. Before I could respond, the comm crackled. "Engineering, prepare for boarding party. Colony inspectors need to verify cargo integrity." Jim's face went pale. "They never inspect before unloading." He dropped the mop and sprinted to his workstation, fingers flying over the controls. "Mike, get to the bridge. Tell them to lock down the..." The ship's lights flickered, and suddenly every screen in engineering went dark. Emergency protocols engaged," the ship's AI announced pleasantly. "All crew members, please remain in current locations." No, Jim muttered, yanking open a panel. "They're in the systems already. Mike, you're cleaning access codes. They'll still work. The maintenance protocols are hardwired. They can't be overridden remotely." Seconds later, that's when we heard the screaming from the cargo bay. I'd like to say I did something brave or heroic, but honestly, I just stood there with my mop while Jim shoved past me. He returned seconds later with a toolbox and what looked like a makeshift weapon cobbled together from spare parts. "The colonial administrator who greeted us," Jim said, tossing me something that looked like a modified pressure washer. His badge was on the wrong side. "These aren't shape-shifting parasites. They're mimics. Whole colonies probably been taken over for weeks." The mimics are extinct, I protested. The Galactic Council wiped them out centuries ago. Yeah? Jim's laugh was harsh. Tell that to the thing wearing our doctor's face. I just saw Zizix walk past the cargo bay twice. Same exact walk, same exact movement. No hive mind ever repeats a pattern that precisely. He was right. Looking back at all the little things, the too perfect protocols, the excessive security, the way the colony's responses had been just a little too textbook, it was obvious. The mimics had taken over Omega-9, and now they wanted our ship. My access codes, I said, tentacles trembling as I punched them into the maintenance terminal. They'll get us to the bridge through the cleaning ducts. Jim managed a tired smile. See? Told you something smelled wrong. He checked his makeshift weapon. The mimics might be good at copying appearances, but they can't replicate human sweat or pheromones. That's what was bugging me. Everyone at the colony smelled like nothing. As we crawled through the ducts, me leading the way and Jim protecting our rear, I couldn't help but ask, "How did you know?" "Really?" I heard him yawn despite the situation. Humans spent millions of years as prey, Mike. We learned to spot predators before we knew what we were spotting. Sometimes your brain puts it together before you know why. He chuckled softly. Also, I may have calibrated the quantum drive's particle sensors to scan for biological anomalies while everyone was arguing with me. Data's stored in my personal coffee maker. Yeah, your coffee maker? Only device on the ship. Nobody but me would ever want to touch. Now shut up and keep crawling. We've got a bridge to save, and I'm starting to crash from all that caffeine. So you're probably wondering how it all turned out. Well, I'm here telling you this story, aren't I? Thanks to my maintenance codes and Jim's jerry-rigged weapons, turns out his pressure washer idea was brilliant, mimics hate concentrated cleaning solution, we managed to get to the bridge. Captain Kurth had already been replaced, but her copy made one crucial mistake. It was sitting completely still. Our real captain never could keep all 8 legs from tapping when she was concentrating. The next few hours were chaos. Jim's coffee maker data proved invaluable when the Galactic Council's emergency response team arrived. Turns out he'd documented every subtle inconsistency, every tiny wrong detail that had triggered his instincts. His report is now required reading at the Academy, listed under Case Study, Human Intuition and Threat Detection. These days I'm still a janitor on the Stellar Wanderer, but things are different. For one, nobody teases me about my name anymore. Being the guy who helped Jim Rickard save the ship from a mimic invasion tends to earn you some respect, even if your primary weapon was a modified cleaning sprayer. Jim? He got promoted to chief engineer, though he turned down a transfer to a bigger ship. Says he likes our crew, and more importantly, we let him install coffee makers in every major section of the vessel. He's still perpetually half asleep, still fixes impossible problems while yawning, and still occasionally stops in the middle of a corridor to announce that something doesn't smell right. The difference is now everybody listens. Last week I was cleaning near the quantum drive when Jim shuffled in, fresh coffee in hand. He looked at me with those tired eyes of his and said something I'll never forget. You know what's funny, Mike? Most species evolved to be apex predators or specialized survivors. They developed perfect logic, precise senses, specialized abilities. But humans? We evolved scared. We were prey for so long that we learned to notice when things are wrong before we know why they're wrong. All those millions of years of looking over our shoulders, it gave us something the galaxy's top predators never needed. Intuition. He took a long sip of coffee and added, "That's why humans make such good engineers, you know. Half of fixing machines is just knowing when something feels off." He swallowed his drink, then said, "I've learned a lot since the Omega-9 incident. I've learned that sometimes the most sophisticated sensors in the galaxy can't compete with a sleepy human's gut feeling. I've learned that being logical doesn't always mean ignoring instinct. But mostly, I've learned that when a human says something doesn't smell right, you'd better pay attention, even if they're running on nothing but gas station coffee and stubbornness. Oh, and one more thing. The Council did eventually figure out why the mimics chose Omega-9 for their first re-emergence in centuries. Turns out the colony's location was perfect for intercepting shipping routes across 3 sectors. The mimics had planned everything meticulously, accounted for every variable. The one thing they hadn't counted on was a perpetually exhausted human engineer who thought something smelled funny. These days, whenever someone asks me about working with humans, I tell them this story, and I always end it the same way. In a galaxy full of perfect predators and evolved specialists, never underestimate a species that learned to detect danger before they had words to describe it, even if they do need concerning amounts of caffeine to function. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. Feel free to comment and share this story too. It helps the channel grow. Let's make this channel huge together.